What if one of the biggest mistakes we make about sex is believing that there must be one simple reason behind it? What if desire is not merely about attraction, pleasure, or romance, but a complicated intersection of connection, curiosity, confidence, security, validation, freedom, emotion, and circumstance? And what if understanding those motivations could teach us something far more valuable than how people behave in intimate relationships? It could teach us how to understand ourselves. Every day, people make decisions about love, intimacy, money, careers, and relationships without fully understanding the forces driving them. We seek approval and mistake it for love. We chase income and mistake it for freedom. We pursue attention and mistake it for self-worth. We remain in relationships because we fear being alone, spend money because we fear looking unsuccessful, and sometimes say yes when everything inside us is asking us to say no. But there is another way. Imagine discovering that your desires do not have to control you, that attraction can be understood without being worshipped, that intimacy can exist without ownership, that saying no can be an act of strength rather than rejection, that saying yes can be meaningful precisely because it is freely chosen. And imagine realizing that financial independence can give you the same kind of power, the ability to make decisions because they reflect your values rather than desperation. Real freedom is not having unlimited choices. It is having enough knowledge, confidence, health, resources, and self-respect to choose consciously. Your body matters. Your boundaries matter. Your relationships matter. Your money matters. Your future matters. And perhaps the most important question is not simply, why do we desire what we desire? It is this: are the choices we make today building a life that our future selves will be proud to inherit? Imagine being asked a question that sounds almost embarrassingly simple. Why do women have sex? At first, you might think the answer is obvious. Desire, attraction, love, pleasure, reproduction, surely that is enough. But the moment we look more carefully, the simple answer begins to dissolve. Human sexuality is rarely governed by one motive, one emotion, or one biological instruction. Behind a single intimate decision can be a remarkable collection of feelings, expectations, memories, opportunities, fears, ambitions, curiosities, and personal needs. A woman may want pleasure. She may want closeness. She may want to feel desirable. She may want to express love. She may want reassurance. She may want to experience something new. She may be responding to a relationship, a moment, an opportunity, a mood, or a desire she herself has only recently understood. And sometimes, the reason may be surprisingly complicated. That complexity is not a problem to be solved. It is a feature of being human. When I began looking closely at the question of why women have sex, one of the most interesting discoveries was that the question itself contains an assumption that deserves examination. We often speak about sexual behavior as if every sexual act must have one underlying cause. We search for the master key, the hidden explanation that will unlock everything. But human behavior does not always work that way. A person can make the same decision for completely different reasons on different days. Two people can behave in exactly the same way while experiencing entirely different motivations. And perhaps most importantly, the reasons people give for their behavior may not always reveal every psychological or social force influencing the decision. If we want to understand sexuality, we have to become comfortable with complexity. This is where curiosity becomes more valuable than judgment. Instead of beginning with the question, what should women want? We can ask a more useful question, what motivates people in real life? Instead of forcing every experience into a narrow category, we can listen to the stories people tell us and look for patterns. Instead of assuming that sexuality is only about reproduction or only about pleasure, we can recognize that sexual behavior may serve many functions at once. It can bring physical pleasure and emotional comfort. It can reinforce a bond and communicate affection. It can satisfy curiosity while also creating vulnerability. It can sometimes be connected with insecurity, validation, status, negotiation, or even conflict. The human mind is capable of carrying several motives simultaneously. Think about how many decisions you make every day that appear simple from the outside. Someone sees you buying a cup of coffee and assumes you wanted caffeine. Perhaps you did, but perhaps you also wanted a few minutes alone. Perhaps the cafe reminds you of someone. Perhaps you were rewarding yourself after a difficult morning. Perhaps you needed a place to think. The visible behavior is the same, but the internal story can be completely different. Sexual behavior is even more complicated because it involves the body, emotions, identity, relationships, vulnerability, social expectations, and personal history. Reducing it to one explanation is therefore likely to leave much of the story untold. One of the most important lessons we can take from examining women's sexual motivations is that desire should not be treated as a universal language with only one translation. Desire can mean different things to different people. One woman may experience sex primarily as physical pleasure. Another may associate it strongly with emotional connection. Another may enjoy the excitement of novelty. Another may find that sexual intimacy becomes especially meaningful when she feels emotionally safe. Another may experience different motivations at different stages of life. None of these experiences automatically invalidates the others, and this gives us a broader lesson about human beings. Never confuse a single explanation with the whole person. We often make this mistake in every area of life. We see someone who earns a great deal of money and assume we know why they work so hard. Perhaps they want status. Perhaps they want security. Perhaps they grew up without financial stability and never want to experience that fear again. Perhaps they love competition. Perhaps they are supporting a family. Perhaps they simply enjoy their work. The behavior working intensely does not reveal the entire motivation. The same principle applies to relationships. Someone may remain in a relationship because they are deeply in love. Someone else may remain because they are afraid of being alone. Another person may stay because of children, finances, social expectations, shared history, or the hope that things will improve. From the outside, the behavior looks identical. From the inside, the emotional reality may be completely different. This is why listening matters. When we listen carefully to people's experiences, we begin to understand that sexuality is not simply a biological event. It can become a form of communication. Sometimes a person is saying, "I desire you." Sometimes the message is, "I trust you." Sometimes it is, "I want to feel close to you." Sometimes it may be, "I want to feel wanted." Sometimes it is simply, "This feels good." And sometimes people themselves may not have a perfectly articulated explanation. Human beings do not always understand every motivation operating inside them. That does not mean our choices are meaningless. Quite the opposite. It means self-awareness becomes extremely valuable. Imagine waking up one morning and realizing that you have been making important decisions without ever asking yourself why. You have followed expectations because they were familiar. You pursued relationships because everyone around you was doing the same. You spent money because your lifestyle demanded it. You worked longer hours because success was defined for you by income. You sought approval because approval had become a substitute for confidence. Then one day you stop and ask, whose goals am I actually pursuing? That question can be uncomfortable, but discomfort can be the beginning of freedom. A powerful principle to remember is, the moment you understand the reason behind a choice, you gain the possibility of choosing differently. That principle applies to sexuality, relationships, and money alike. If you understand that you are spending because you are stressed, you can develop another way to handle stress. If you recognize that you are seeking constant romantic validation because you feel insecure, you can begin addressing the insecurity rather than endlessly chasing reassurance. If you discover that you are staying in a relationship because you are terrified of being alone, you can distinguish love from fear. If you recognize that you are working every available hour because you equate income with personal worth, you can reconsider what success actually means. Awareness does not automatically solve the problem, but without awareness, you may not even know there is a problem. This is one reason the study of sexual motivation is so fascinating. It challenges the idea that human behavior always has a single, obvious purpose. Consider reproduction. From an evolutionary perspective, reproduction is obviously fundamental to the continuation of a species. Yet people frequently engage in sexual behavior when reproduction is not the immediate objective. That observation alone should make us cautious about simplistic explanations. Sexual behavior can exist in contexts where pregnancy is not desired or possible, and people can pursue intimacy for reasons that have little to do with having children. This does not make biology irrelevant. Biology matters enormously. Hormones, reproductive systems, attraction, developmental processes, and evolutionary pressures all contribute to human sexuality. But biology does not operate in a vacuum. Human beings also possess memory, imagination, language, culture, social learning, personal values, and the ability to reflect on their own behavior. We do not merely experience impulses. We interpret them, and interpretation matters. A sensation can become excitement. Excitement can become attraction. Attraction can become fantasy. Fantasy can become a decision. A decision can become an experience. And experience can become a memory. And that memory can influence future choices. Human sexuality exists within this constantly moving system. That is why there is no single sentence that can adequately explain why women have sex. Any serious exploration has to leave room for many motivations and recognize that they can overlap. Pleasure and emotional connection are not mutually exclusive. Attraction and security are not mutually exclusive. Curiosity and affection can exist together. Desire can be physical and psychological at the same time. This complexity also reminds us why shame is such a poor teacher. When people are taught that certain questions about sexuality are forbidden, they often become less informed rather than less sexual. Silence does not eliminate curiosity. It simply makes it harder to discuss responsibly. A person who cannot ask questions may turn to unreliable sources. A person who feels ashamed of normal concerns may avoid seeking appropriate medical care. A person who has never been taught how to communicate about boundaries may enter intimate situations without the language needed to express themselves. Clearly, knowledge is therefore not the enemy of responsibility. Knowledge is one of its foundations. Understanding, sexual health, consent, contraception, sexually transmitted infections, emotional boundaries, and communication can help people make informed choices. Sexuality does not become less meaningful because we understand it scientifically. In many ways, understanding gives people greater agency, and agency is central to freedom. Consent is therefore essential. A sexual relationship should involve freely given agreement, respect for boundaries, and the ability of each person to make choices without coercion or manipulation. Desire does not create entitlement. Attraction does not create ownership. A relationship that does not erase individual autonomy. These principles are not obstacles to intimacy. They are what make healthy intimacy possible. Think about the difference between wanting someone and possessing someone. Wanting is about your experience. Possessing is about denying theirs. You can desire someone deeply while still respecting their right to say no. You can love someone deeply while recognizing that they remain a separate human being. In fact, the ability to respect another person's freedom may be one of the clearest expressions of genuine respect. This principle has a remarkable parallel in financial life. Money can create choices, but money can also create control. If one person controls every financial resource in a relationship, the other person may have limited ability to make independent decisions. Financial dependence can become a source of vulnerability. That is why financial literacy and financial autonomy can be important components of personal freedom. This does not mean every couple must manage money in exactly the same way. There is no universal financial arrangement that works for every relationship. Some couples combine finances completely. Others maintain separate accounts. Some use a combination of shared and individual resources. What matters is that the arrangement is understood, mutually acceptable, transparent where necessary, and consistent with the couple's goals. The financial freedom principle is simple. Money should increase your choices, not quietly become the mechanism that removes them. That means learning what your money is doing. Know what comes in. Know what goes out. Understand your obligations. Build savings when possible. Manage debt responsibly. Develop useful skills. Protect your financial health. The goal is not to become obsessed with money. The goal is to prevent money from becoming a source of unnecessary dependence. This connects to sexuality in an unexpected way. Both financial life and intimate life involve agency. In both areas, people are healthier when they can make informed decisions rather than being pushed by fear, misinformation, coercion, or social pressure. Consider the word choice. We often use it casually, but choice becomes meaningful only when a person has enough information and freedom to make an informed decision. If someone does not understand their options, their decision be severely constrained. If someone is pressured, their apparent agreement may not reflect genuine willingness. If someone is financially trapped, their ability to leave an unhealthy situation may be limited. Freedom therefore has conditions. Information matters. Resources matter. Safety matters. Confidence matters. Support matters. And self-knowledge matters. This is why learning to understand yourself is one of the most valuable investments you can make. Ask yourself what you actually want. Not what you think you should want. Not what your friends expect. Not what social media celebrates. Not what your family assumes. Not what a partner pressures you to want. What do you actually value? That question is more difficult than it sounds because we are social creatures. We absorb expectations from childhood. We learn ideas about romance, masculinity, femininity, marriage, success, beauty, sexuality, and wealth long before we are old enough to question them. Some of those lessons may be useful. Others may not fit our lives. Maturity requires the ability to examine what we inherited. You do not have to reject every tradition. You do not have to accept every tradition. You can ask, does this belief help me live a healthier, more ethical, more meaningful life? That is a powerful question, and it applies to financial beliefs too. Maybe you grew up believing that talking about money is rude. If so, you may struggle to negotiate salaries, discuss expenses, or plan finances with a partner. Maybe you learned that successful people must display expensive possessions. You may spend beyond your means simply to communicate status. Maybe you learned that debt is normal and unavoidable. You may never question the cost of carrying it. Inherited beliefs can become invisible cages. Questioning them can open a door, but questioning does not mean automatically replacing an old belief with its opposite. The goal is not rebellion for its own sake. The goal is evidence, reflection, and deliberate choice. That is why scientific research can be so valuable when exploring intimate behavior. Research can challenge assumptions, reveal patterns, and show us that human motivation is often more varied than cultural stereotypes suggest. But research should also be interpreted carefully. A study does not automatically tell us what every individual will do. Population-level patterns are not personal destines. A statistical tendency does not dictate what a particular woman must want. This is another principle worth remembering. A pattern can explain a population without defining a person. Never turn averages into cages. A woman is not a statistic. A man is not a stereotype. A relationship is not a laboratory experiment. Human beings deserve to be understood as individuals, while still benefiting from what research can teach us about broader patterns. And perhaps this is the deeper reason to explore the question of why women have sex. Not to create another stereotype, but to break the habit of believing that there is one universal answer. Some motivations may involve pleasure. Some may involve intimacy. Some may involve attraction. Some may involve reassurance. Some may involve novelty. Some may involve relationship maintenance. Some may involve curiosity. Some may involve self-esteem. Some may involve opportunity. Some may involve personal circumstances, and several of these can exist simultaneously. Imagine a woman who feels deeply connected to her partner and also enjoys the physical pleasure of intimacy. Which reason is the real reason? Why must there be only one? Human motivation is often layered. Asking which single motive is responsible may be like asking which ingredient is responsible for the flavor of an entire meal. The answer may be several. This layered nature of motivation is important because it encourages compassion. If we assume every sexual decision has one obvious motive, we are more likely to judge people when their behavior does not fit our expectations. If we recognize complexity, we become more willing to ask questions before making assumptions. And that habit asking before assuming is valuable far beyond sexuality. In relationships, ask rather than guess. In finance, calculate rather than assume. In health, seek reliable information rather than relying on rumors. In your own emotional life, investigate rather than immediately judge yourself. This is a professional principle I would encourage everyone to carry forward. Curiosity is often more useful than certainty. Certainty closes the investigation. Curiosity keeps the door open, and a curious person can continue learning. That matters because none of us reaches a point where we understand ourselves perfectly. Our motivations change. Our circumstances change. Our bodies change. Our relationships change. Our priorities change. What mattered at 20 may not matter at 40. What felt essential during one season of life may become less important in another. Change does not necessarily mean inconsistency. Sometimes it means growth. A person who once prioritized excitement may later prioritize stability. Someone who once valued career advancement above everything may eventually discover that time with family matters more. Someone who once avoided emotional vulnerability may eventually become comfortable with intimacy. Someone who once spent impulsively may develop a desire for financial independence. Do not be afraid of becoming more aware of what you want. Just remember that desire should be accompanied by responsibility. If you want intimacy, communicate. If you want pleasure, understand sexual health. If you want commitment, discuss expectations. If you want independence, build practical resources. If you want financial freedom, develop financial habits. If you want a meaningful life, identify what meaning means to you, and do not confuse wanting something with being entitled to it. That distinction is foundational. You can want another person's affection without being entitled to it. You can want a particular lifestyle without being entitled to unlimited resources. You can want financial success without being entitled to someone else's money. You can want a relationship to continue without being entitled to control another person's decision. Freedom becomes sustainable when we recognize that other people are also free. This is where empathy enters the conversation. Empathy does not require agreeing with everyone. It means attempting to understand another person's experience without immediately reducing it to your own assumptions. When we practice empathy, we become better listeners. We may discover that a behavior we initially misunderstood had a completely different meaning to the person involved. And sometimes empathy reveals genuine incompatibility. Understanding someone does not mean you must accept everything they do. You can understand a person's motivation and still disagree with their behavior. You can understand why someone spends impulsively and still refuse to share financial risk. You can understand why someone is jealous and still establish a boundary against controlling behavior. You can understand someone's sexual preferences and still recognize that your own preferences are different. Understanding is not surrender. Understanding gives you better information from which to make decisions. And good decisions are at the heart of freedom. Financial freedom is often described as having enough money that you no longer need to work, but a more useful definition is having enough resources and flexibility that your important decisions are less dominated by financial fear. That may include savings, manageable expenses, useful skills, responsible investing, insurance, diversified income where appropriate, and strong financial habits. The ultimate objective is choice, The same is true of personal freedom. If you know yourself, understand your health, communicate clearly, recognize your boundaries, and have the confidence to make informed decisions, you possess more choices than someone who is trapped by ignorance or fear. So let this be one of the first principles of the journey. The purpose of knowledge is not to tell you what to choose. It is to give you enough understanding to choose wisely. That is the spirit in which we should approach sexuality, not with shame. Not with simplistic assumptions, not with the expectation that every woman will have the same motivations. But with curiosity, science, compassion, responsibility, and respect for individual agency, because behind every statistic is a human being, behind every behavior is a story, and behind every story is a person trying, in one way or another, to navigate the extraordinary complexity of being human. Once we understand that, the question "why do women have sex?" becomes much more interesting. It is no longer a demand for one answer. It becomes an invitation to explore the many forces that can shape desire, intimacy, connection, pleasure, identity, and choice. And perhaps that is where the real lesson begins. The more carefully we study human sexuality, the less comfortable we should become with simplistic explanations of human beings. We are more complicated than that. Our motivations are layered. Our circumstances matter. Our choices matter. Our relationships matter. Our health matters. Our autonomy matters. And when we learn to hold all of those truths together, we gain something far more valuable than a simple answer. We gain a deeper understanding of ourselves and, perhaps, a little more wisdom about how to live. If we want to understand sexual motivation, we have to move beyond the familiar assumption that sex is simply the result of attraction. Attraction certainly matters, but it is only one piece of a much larger psychological picture. Human beings rarely make important decisions for one reason alone. The same woman may experience sexual desire because she finds someone physically attractive, because she feels emotionally connected, because she wants to explore something new, because intimacy makes her feel secure, because she wants to communicate affection, or because she is responding to a particular moment in her relationship. Sometimes the motivation is obvious. Sometimes it is subtle. Sometimes several motives operate simultaneously, and sometimes a person understands only part of what is influencing her. The more closely we examine sexuality, the more we discover that desire is not a simple switch that turns on and off. It is an experience shaped by context. This is one reason the study of sexual behavior is so revealing about human psychology. We tend to imagine that our choices originate inside us, as though the individual mind exists separately from the surrounding world. But context matters enormously. How safe do you feel? How connected do you feel? What do you believe the other person wants? What has happened between you previously? Are you stressed? Are you relaxed? Do you feel attractive? Do you feel respected? Are you curious? Are you lonely? Are you excited? Do you trust the person? Do you feel free to say yes or no without consequences? These questions can change the meaning of the same experience. Consider a simple example. Imagine two women who are equally attracted to someone. On paper, their motivation might appear identical, but one woman may be in a relationship characterized by trust, communication, and emotional safety, while the other may feel uncertain about the relationship and worried about what will happen afterward. The physical attraction may be similar, but the psychological experience can be entirely different. Human sexuality does not happen in isolation from the emotional environment in which it occurs. That insight is important because our culture often treats desire as though it were purely physical. We talk about chemistry, sparks, attraction, and sexual tension as though the body simply announces what it wants and the mind follows. But the mind participates in desire. Expectations participate. Memories participate. Beliefs participate. Self-image participates. Relationships participate. Even the meaning we assign to an experience can influence how we feel about it. This means that understanding sexuality requires us to understand something about the human need for connection. People are social creatures. We do not simply seek physical sensations. We seek belonging, recognition, affection, and acceptance. We want to matter to someone. We want to be understood. We want to feel valued. Sexual intimacy can sometimes become one of the ways people experience those needs. That does not mean every sexual experience is secretly about emotional connection. Pleasure can simply be pleasure, but for many people, physical intimacy and emotional meaning can become intertwined. This is where the distinction between sex and intimacy becomes useful. They can overlap, but they are not identical. A person can experience sex without deep emotional intimacy, and a person can experience profound intimacy without sex. A long conversation can create intimacy. Caring for someone during an illness can create intimacy. Sharing a fear can create intimacy. Laughing together can create intimacy. Trust grows through many kinds of interactions. Sexuality therefore exists within a much larger ecosystem of human connection, and once we recognize that, another misconception begins to disappear. The idea that sexual behavior can always be explained by a single biological imperative. Biology is enormously important, but human beings are not simply biological machines following instructions. We interpret our biological experiences through culture, relationships, memory, personality, and individual values. A biological capacity does not automatically dictate a behavioral outcome. Think about hunger. The human body tells us that it needs nourishment, but what we eat, when we eat, how we eat, and with whom we eat are influenced by culture, emotion, habit, availability, economics, and personal preference. Sexuality is similarly embedded in context. Biology provides important foundations, but human behavior builds an extraordinarily complicated structure on top of them. This is why the question of why is so important. If we ask only what people do, we learn about behavior. If we ask why they do it, we begin exploring motivation. But even then, we should be cautious. People are not always perfectly transparent to themselves. We can tell ourselves one story about a decision while other influences operate beneath conscious awareness. That does not mean our explanations are false. It means they may be incomplete. Self-awareness is therefore a skill rather than a destination. You can ask yourself, what am I looking for in this relationship? You can ask, what do I hope this experience will make me feel? You can ask, am I choosing this because I genuinely want it, or because I am afraid of losing someone? You can ask, do I feel safe enough to be honest? You can ask, what would I want if I knew nobody would judge me? These questions can be surprisingly powerful because they separate internal desire from external pressure, and external pressure can be subtle. It does not always look like someone explicitly telling you what to do. Sometimes pressure comes from cultural expectations. Sometimes it comes from comparison. Sometimes it comes from the fear of being different. Sometimes it comes from the belief that a relationship has certain obligations. Sometimes it comes from the desire to prove that you are desirable, attractive, mature, experienced, loyal, or successful. A person can make a choice voluntarily while still being influenced by the expectations surrounding them. That is why examining motivation matters. The same thing happens with money. How much of your spending is genuinely connected to your values, and how much is connected to what you think success is supposed to look like? Do you need the expensive car? Or do you need the feeling of being respected? Do you want the large house? Or do you want the security you associate with it? Do you want the designer clothing? Or do you want the social approval that may come with it? Do you want to work 80 hours a week? Or do you fear that slowing down will make you less valuable? These questions do not automatically mean the answers are wrong. There is nothing inherently wrong with enjoying beautiful possessions, ambitious careers, or financial success. The issue is whether the choice is conscious. That leads to a financial freedom principle that belongs alongside everything we learn about human motivation. Spend according to your values, not according to your insecurities. If a purchase genuinely improves your life and fits your financial circumstances, it can be worthwhile. But if you are repeatedly spending to silence anxiety, impress people, compete with others, or compensate for emotional dissatisfaction, the purchase may solve the wrong problem. Money is rarely just money. We attach meaning to it. For some people, money means safety. For others, it means status. For others, independence. For others, love, because they were taught that providing financially is how affection is demonstrated. For others, money means freedom from the instability they experience growing up. Understanding the emotional meaning of money can therefore be just as important as understanding the mathematics of money. The same is true of sex. Sex is rarely just sex in the psychological sense. It may carry meanings about attractiveness, identity, trust, affection, power, vulnerability, pleasure, belonging, or personal freedom. Those meanings vary from person to person. This is why comparison can be so destructive. We see someone else's choices and assume we know what they mean. We may think, if she behaves this way, she must feel that way. But we are often filling in the blanks with our own assumptions. A better habit is to remain curious. When you do not know, ask. When you are uncertain, listen. When someone tells you what they feel, resist the temptation to immediately replace their explanation with your own. Their experience belongs to them. This does not mean every explanation is scientifically complete. Personal stories are valuable, but research can reveal patterns that individuals may not notice. The strongest understanding comes from allowing both perspectives to inform us. Listen to people's experiences while also examining broader evidence. That balance is particularly important when discussing differences between women and men. It is tempting to search for simple formulas. Women want this, men want that. But biological sex does not erase individual variation. There can be average differences in certain psychological or behavioral traits, yet enormous overlap between individuals. A woman may have motivations commonly associated with men. A man may have motivations commonly associated with women. Human beings do not always respect our categories, and perhaps that is a good thing. Categories can help us recognize patterns, but they become dangerous when we turn them into rules. Averages describe tendencies. They do not dictate destiny. One of the most useful principles for understanding people is, never let a statistical pattern become a personal prison. You are allowed to be an individual. Your partner is allowed to be an individual. Your experiences do not have to match somebody else's. This matters especially in relationships because expectations can quietly create conflict. Suppose one person assumes that sex always communicates love, while the other primarily experiences it as physical pleasure and affection. Neither interpretation is automatically wrong. But if they never discuss the difference, each may interpret the other's behavior incorrectly. One may think, if you loved me, you would want sex more often. The other may think, if you loved me, you would not use sex as a test of our relationship. The underlying issue may not actually be the amount of sex. It may be the meaning assigned to sex. That is why communication is essential. Ask your partner what intimacy means to them. Ask what makes them feel desired. Ask what makes them feel safe. Ask what boundaries matter. Ask what expectations they have, and be willing to answer those questions yourself. Communication does not guarantee agreement, but it gives disagreement a chance to become constructive rather than destructive. This is a broader lesson about all relationships. Assumptions create stories, but conversations create information, and information is one of the greatest forms of power. The more accurately you understand reality, the better your decisions can become. That principle applies to financial freedom too. You cannot build a financial plan around a fantasy. You need to know your actual expenses. You need to understand your debts. You need to know the terms of your financial commitments. You need to understand the risks associated with investments. You need to recognize the difference between a financial goal and a financial impulse. A person who refuses to look at their finances because they are uncomfortable is allowing emotion to control information. A person who is willing to look honestly can begin making changes. The first step may not be dramatic. It may simply be opening the account statement. Writing down the numbers. calculating the monthly obligations, identifying unnecessary spending, creating a realistic savings target, learning the basics of investing, seeking qualified professional advice when appropriate. Small acts of clarity can create large changes over time. The same principle applies to emotional life. Write down what you actually feel. Identify what you are afraid of. Separate what happened from the story you are telling yourself about what happened. Ask what you know. Ask what you assume. Then decide what deserves action. This process is not about turning human beings into spreadsheets. It is about giving yourself enough clarity to avoid being controlled by vague emotions. And emotions deserve respect. Fear can protect us. Desire can motivate us. Jealousy can reveal insecurity or a damaged agreement. Loneliness can signal a need for connection. Excitement can draw us toward exploration. Sadness can tell us that something matters. The mistake is not having emotions. The mistake is treating every emotion as an instruction. A useful motivational principle is, feel everything, but do not surrender your judgment to every feeling. That principle is especially important when making decisions with long-term consequences. A temporary emotional state can lead to permanent consequence. An impulsive purchase can become years of debt. An impulsive message can damage a relationship. An impulsive sexual decision can carry health or emotional consequences. An impulsive career decision can disrupt financial stability. This does not mean we should live in fear of every decision. It means we should understand that freedom includes the ability to pause. The pause is powerful. Before spending. Pause. Before sending the message. Pause. Before making a major relationship decision. Pause. Before assuming you know someone's intentions. Pause. Ask yourself, what happens next? That simple question introduces the future into the present, and financial freedom is largely about learning to think across time. The financially fragile person often focuses almost entirely on the immediate moment. What can I buy today? What feels good now? What can I afford this month? The financially resilient person asks a second question, what will this decision do to future choices? That is the heart of delayed gratification. You do not have to reject present pleasure. You simply refuse to sacrifice your entire future for it. The same idea can be applied to relationships. Immediate emotional satisfaction is not always the same as long-term relational health. Winning an argument may feel satisfying while damaging trust. Demanding reassurance may temporarily reduce anxiety while increasing dependence. Avoiding a difficult conversation may create short-term peace while allowing resentment to grow. Short-term relief and long-term well-being are not always the same thing. Maturity involves learning to recognize the difference, and this brings us back to sexual motivation. A particular sexual decision may satisfy an immediate need, but the meaning and consequences may extend beyond that moment. Health, trust, expectations, contraception, emotional reactions, relationship agreements, and personal values can all matter. Responsible sexuality therefore requires more than desire. It requires awareness. That does not make sex less pleasurable. It can make intimacy more intentional. There is nothing inherently contradictory about pleasure and responsibility. We understand this in other areas of life. Food can be pleasurable and nutrition still matters. Travel can be exciting and safety still matters. Financial investing can be rewarding and risk management still matters. Sexual intimacy can be pleasurable and consent and health still matter. Responsibility is not the enemy of enjoyment. It is one of the conditions that allow enjoyment to remain healthy. This is why sexual health education matters. People deserve accurate information about contraception, sexually transmitted infections, consent, communication, and reproductive health. When reliable information is replaced by shame or misinformation, people are not made safer. They are simply made less informed. Knowledge gives people more choices, and choices are central to freedom. There is another dimension we should consider: self-esteem. People sometimes seek sexual experiences partly because they want to feel attractive or desirable. Wanting to feel desired is deeply human. Being seen positively by another person can reinforce our sense of worth, But there is a danger when external validation becomes the primary source of self-esteem. If your confidence depends entirely on someone else finding you attractive, then their attention becomes your emotional currency. When the attention disappears, the confidence may disappear with it. The same dynamic occurs with money. If your self-worth depends entirely on income, your financial life becomes an emotional scoreboard. Every raise feels like proof that you are valuable. Every setback feels like proof that you are failing. But your bank account is a measurement of financial resources. It is not a measurement of human worth. Likewise, someone else's sexual interest is information about attraction. It is not a complete measurement of your value as a person. This distinction is liberating. You can enjoy being desired without needing desire to prove your worth. You can enjoy financial success without needing wealth to prove your worth. You can appreciate compliments without becoming dependent on them. Self-esteem becomes more stable when it is built from multiple sources: competence, relationships, integrity, values, health, learning, and self-respect. This is another form of diversification. Do not put your entire emotional net worth into one account. If your identity depends on one person, one job, one number, or one form of approval, you become vulnerable to any change in that area. Build a broader life. Develop friendships, cultivate skills, maintain interests, take care of your health. Learn about money, create goals, make space for creativity. Invest in relationships that are supportive and respectful. Then a setback in one area does not automatically destroy your entire sense of self. This principle applies to romantic relationships too. A partner can be profoundly important without becoming your entire universe. Healthy relationships allow people to remain individuals. They can have shared experiences while maintaining personal interests. They can support one another without demanding complete psychological fusion. In dependence and intimacy, not enemies. They can strengthen each other. When two people know they can stand on their own, their decision to stand together can become more meaningful. That does not mean everyone should live separately or maintain rigid boundaries around every part of life. Relationships require sharing. The point is simply that love should not require the disappearance of individuality. A powerful relationship principle is, the healthiest connection does not ask you to become smaller so that another person can feel secure. And the same principle applies to financial relationships. If sharing money requires one person to surrender all autonomy, something may need to be reconsidered. Transparency is important, but control is different from transparency. Partnership is different from domination. Talk about money. Talk about sex. Talk about expectations. Talk about the future. Talk about boundaries. Talk about fears. The conversations may feel uncomfortable. Have them anyway. Avoiding difficult topics does not eliminate the topics. It simply guarantees that you will eventually confront them under worse circumstances. This is one of the most important principles of mature life. What you refuse to discuss does not disappear. It simply loses the opportunity to be handled well. That applies to health. It applies to debt. It applies to sexual expectations. It applies to trust. It applies to family responsibilities. It applies to future plans. And it applies to the private assumptions we carry about ourselves. Maybe you believe you are not financially disciplined. Question that belief. Perhaps you simply never learned the systems that make discipline easier. Maybe you believe you are incapable of healthy intimacy. Question that belief. Perhaps you have learned patterns that can be changed. Maybe you believe your desires make you a bad person. Question that belief. Desire itself is not the same as action, and feelings do not automatically determine character. What matters is how we respond. This is an important distinction because shame often makes people less reflective. If someone believes a desire makes them morally defective, they may hide it rather than examine it. Secrecy can make healthy decision-making harder. By contrast, curiosity allows a person to say, "This is what I feel. What does it mean? What do I want to do with it? What consequences should I consider?" That is a much more mature question. You do not need to be frightened by your own mind. You need to understand it. And understanding takes patience. There will be times when you discover motives you do not particularly like. Perhaps you realize you wanted attention more than connection. Perhaps you were spending money to impress people. Perhaps you were staying in a relationship because you were afraid of being alone. Perhaps you were avoiding an important conversation because you wanted temporary comfort. Do not turn self-awareness into self-hatred. Awareness is useful because it creates an opportunity to change. A mistake becomes valuable when it teaches you something. A difficult experience becomes valuable when it increases your wisdom. A painful realization can become the beginning of a healthier pattern. This is why I would phrase another motivational principle this way. You do not need to be proud of every chapter of your past to become proud of the direction of your future. Your past explains some things. It does not have to control everything. You can learn new habits. You can change financial behavior. You can develop healthier boundaries. You can improve communication. You can seek professional help when appropriate. You can become more informed about sexual health. You can redefine success. You can build a life in which your choices increasingly reflect your values. And that is ultimately what understanding sexual motivation can teach us. The question is not simply why people behave as they do. The deeper question is whether we are conscious enough of our own motivations to make choices that serve our long-term well-being, because once you understand that sexual behavior can have many motives, you begin to understand something much larger. Human beings are complex decision-makers living inside complex social environments. We want. We fear. We hope. We remember. We compare. We imagine. We attach meaning. And then we choose. Sometimes wisely, sometimes poorly, but always with the possibility of learning. That possibility who are hope lives. So do not be afraid of complexity. Do not demand one explanation when several may be operating. Do not turn patterns into stereotypes. Do not turn desires into commands. Do not turn money into a measurement of worth. Do not turn relationships into ownership. And do not turn mistakes into permanent identities. Instead, become curious. Learn the facts. Know your values. Communicate clearly. Respect consent. Protect your health. Build financial resilience. And when you find yourself standing at the intersection of desire and decision, give yourself permission to pause and ask the question that can change everything. What am I really seeking, and will the choice I make now move me closer to the life I actually want? That question transforms impulse into reflection. Reflection creates choice, and choice, used responsibly, is one of the greatest forms of freedom we possess. One of the most fascinating things about human sexuality is that what happens in the body is only part of the story. The body may respond to attraction, touch, hormones, novelty, or physical stimulation, but the mind is constantly asking another set of questions. What does this mean? What does this person mean to me? How will I feel afterward? What does this experience say about me? Am I safe? Am I wanted? Am I respected? Do I trust this person? And sometimes those questions are conscious, while at other times they operate quietly in the background. This is why sexual motivation cannot be reduced to a single biological drive. Human beings do not simply experience sensations. We interpret them, attach meaning to them, and place them inside the stories we tell about our lives. Imagine two people sitting across from one another after a long day. Nothing dramatic has happened. There is no grand romantic gesture, no carefully planned evening, no cinematic music. There is simply familiarity. They know each other's expressions. They have shared disappointments, jokes, arguments, responsibilities, and ordinary mornings. In that environment, intimacy may carry a meaning that goes far beyond physical pleasure. It can become a reminder of belonging. It can say, without words, we are still connected. But now imagine another situation. Two people have just met. The chemistry is intense, and everything feels unfamiliar and exciting. The motivation may be completely different. Curiosity and novelty may be central. The body is experiencing something new, and the mind is fascinated by the uncertainty. The outward behavior may look similar, but the internal experience can be worlds apart. This is why context matters so much. A behavior does not carry one permanent meaning. Its meaning depends partly on the people involved and the circumstances surrounding it. A kiss can communicate affection, attraction, reassurance, reconciliation, or simply playful intimacy. A sexual experience can be deeply emotional for one person and primarily physical for another. Neither experience needs to be declared universally correct. The important question is whether the people involved understand what they are choosing and whether the choice is consistent with their values, boundaries, and consent. That brings us to one of the most important ideas in understanding sexual motivation. People sometimes use intimate experiences to regulate emotions. Human beings naturally look for ways to feel better, calmer, closer, more confident, or more alive. Food can soothe us. Exercise can relieve tension. Conversation can comfort us. Music can change our mood. Work can distract us. Social connection can make loneliness easier to bear. Sexuality can sometimes play a similar role. A person may seek intimacy partly because it produces feelings of comfort, connection, excitement, reassurance, or relief. There is nothing inherently strange about wanting to feel good. The question is whether we understand what we are doing and whether the strategy remains healthy. Any behavior can become complicated when it becomes the only way a person knows how to manage difficult emotions. If someone feels lonely and repeatedly seeks sexual validation but remains emotionally isolated, the behavior may provide temporary relief without addressing the deeper need. If someone feels anxious and repeatedly uses shopping to create a brief sense of control, the purchase may feel wonderful for an hour while making the financial problem worse. If someone feels insecure and constantly seeks reassurance from a partner, the reassurance may help temporarily while strengthening the belief that they cannot feel secure on their own. This gives us a powerful general principle. A behavior can solve the feeling of the moment while leaving the problem of the future untouched. That is why self-awareness matters so much. If you notice yourself wanting something intensely, pause for a moment and ask what you hope the experience will give you. Are you looking for pleasure, connection, reassurance, escape, validation, excitement, relief from loneliness? There is no shame in any of these needs. The goal is simply to understand them. Once you know what you are seeking, you have more than one possible path toward meeting the need. If you want connection, perhaps you need a conversation with someone you trust. If you want reassurance, perhaps you need to discuss insecurity openly. If you want excitement, perhaps you need more adventure in your life. If you want stress relief, perhaps you need rest, exercise, creativity, or support. If you want physical pleasure, you can acknowledge that honestly while still considering sexual health, consent, and consequences. The point is not to tell yourself that one desire is acceptable and another is not. The point is to become capable of distinguishing between a need and the particular behavior you have learned to use to meet it. That distinction can transform a person's life. Consider financial behavior. Someone may say, "I need to buy this," but do they actually need the object? Or do they need what they believe the object will make them feel? Perhaps the purchase represents status. Perhaps it represents freedom. Perhaps it represents success. Perhaps it is a reward after a difficult week. Perhaps it is an escape from boredom. If the person can identify the emotional need, they may discover a less expensive and more sustainable way to meet it. This is one of the foundations of financial freedom. Before asking whether you can afford the purchase, ask why you want the purchase. The question changes everything. If you truly value it, budget for it. If it supports your goals, plan for it. If it brings lasting value, make room for it. But if it exists mainly to impress people whose opinions you barely understand, reconsider. Financial freedom is not about refusing yourself every pleasure. That approach can become so restrictive that it eventually collapses. Sustainable financial health is about spending intentionally. It means knowing what matters enough to spend on and what does not. It means recognizing that every dollar has an opportunity cost. Money spent today cannot also be invested for tomorrow. Time spent chasing status cannot simultaneously be spent building relationships. Energy spent worrying about what strangers think cannot be used to create the life you actually want. Resources are finite. That is why priorities matter. The same principle applies to sexual relationships. Emotional energy is finite. Time is finite. Trust is finite. Attention is finite. If you repeatedly invest these resources in situations that conflict with your values, you may eventually feel depleted. That does not mean every relationship must be perfectly efficient or that intimacy should be treated like a financial transaction. Human relationships are not spreadsheets, but the underlying reality remains. What you repeatedly invest in tends to shape your life. This is why choosing relationships carefully matters. Attraction is powerful, but attraction alone does not guarantee compatibility. Chemistry is exciting, but chemistry alone does not create trust. Desire can begin a relationship, but communication helps sustain it. A person may be extraordinarily attractive and still be a poor partner for you. Another person may not create immediate fireworks, but may offer qualities that become deeply valuable over time: kindness, reliability, emotional maturity, curiosity, humor, generosity, or respect. This does not mean chemistry is unimportant. Physical attraction can be a meaningful part of a relationship. It simply means we should resist confusing one dimension of compatibility with the entire picture. Think of a relationship like a structure supported by several foundations. Attraction may be one. Communication may be another. Trust may be another. Shared values may be another. Lifestyle compatibility may be another. Emotional safety may be another. If one foundation is strong, while all the others are weak, the structure may still struggle. And this is where our understanding of women's sexual motivation becomes especially useful. If sexual behavior can serve multiple purposes, then relationships should not be evaluated solely by how frequently partners have sex. Frequency tells us something, but it does not tell us everything. Two couples can have the same frequency of sexual activity while experiencing completely different levels of satisfaction, affection, trust, and connection. Quality and meaning matter. The same principle applies to financial success. Two people can earn exactly the same salary and live completely different financial lives. One may save consistently, avoid unnecessary debt, invest appropriately, and experience growing financial security. Another may spend everything, accumulate high-interest debt, and feel constantly anxious. Income is important, but income is not the same as wealth, and sexual frequency is not the same as sexual fulfillment. A powerful financial principle is: do not confuse the size of the input with the quality of the outcome. More money does not automatically create more freedom. More sexual experiences do not automatically create more happiness. More possessions do not automatically create more security. More work does not automatically create more achievement. What matters is how resources are used and whether they support the life you value. This is particularly important when we talk about social comparison. We live in an environment where people constantly display carefully selected versions of their lives. We see relationships presented as perfect. We see bodies presented as flawless. We see vacations presented as effortless. We see wealth presented as ordinary. We see romance presented as constant excitement. And then we compare our private reality with someone else's public performance. That comparison can distort our expectations. You may begin to wonder whether your relationship is healthy because it does not resemble someone else's. You may wonder whether your sex life is normal because it does not match an exaggerated story. You may wonder whether you are successful because someone else appears to earn more. But comparison rarely gives us enough information. You do not know the entire story behind the photograph. You do not know the financial obligations behind the lifestyle. You do not know the emotional reality behind the relationship. You do not know the private struggles behind the public confidence, and you do not need to. Your task is to understand your own life. A motivational principle worth remembering is: stop using someone else's highlight reel as the measuring stick for your private reality. Instead, ask better questions. Are you becoming healthier? Are your relationships becoming more respectful? Are your finances becoming more stable? Are you learning? Are you building useful skills? Are you becoming more comfortable with yourself? Are your decisions increasingly aligned with your values? Those questions are far more useful than asking whether your life looks impressive from the outside. This becomes especially important for women because cultural messages about sexuality can be contradictory. Women may receive messages encouraging them to be desirable while simultaneously being judged for expressing desire. They may be encouraged to seek relationships, but criticized if they appear too independent. They may be expected to be sexually appealing while being told that sexual confidence should have limits determined by others. These contradictory expectations can create confusion. A person trying to live according to every external expectation will eventually discover that the expectations conflict. You cannot simultaneously satisfy every cultural rule. At some point, you have to develop your own values. That does not mean ignoring ethical standards. Consent, honesty, respect, health, and personal responsibility remain essential. It means distinguishing ethical principles from arbitrary social judgments. Ask yourself, is this actually harmful, or is it simply unfamiliar to someone else? That is a powerful distinction. Of course, not every unconventional behavior is healthy. Individual freedom does not eliminate consequences. A choice can be consensual and still have consequences worth considering. A decision can be legal and still conflict with your values. Something can feel exciting in the moment and still create problems later. Freedom requires responsibility. That is why maturity is not simply doing whatever you want. Maturity is understanding what you want, why you want it, what consequences may follow, and whether you are prepared to accept those consequences. This is true in sexual relationships. It is true in finances. It is true in careers. It is true in nearly every meaningful area of life. Financial freedom, for example, requires accepting that every financial choice has consequences. If you want more flexibility later, you may need to save today. If you want to avoid financial dependence, you may need to develop your own skills and resources. If you want to invest, you must understand risk. If you want to spend generously, you may need to reduce spending somewhere else. Freedom does not mean that consequences disappear. Freedom means you have more ability to choose which consequences you are willing to accept. That is a much more realistic definition of independence. And independence can be especially important within intimate relationships. A healthy partnership is not one in which one person has complete control and the other simply adapts. A healthy partnership allows negotiation. It recognizes that both people have preferences, boundaries, responsibilities, and dreams. Sometimes those dreams will conflict. One person may want to live in the city, the other may prefer the countryside. One may want children, the other may not. One may prioritize career advancement, the other may prioritize flexibility. One may want frequent sexual intimacy, the other may have a different level of desire. These differences do not automatically mean the relationship is doomed, but they do mean that honest communication is necessary. And sometimes honesty leads to compromise. Sometimes it leads to creative solutions. Sometimes it reveals an incompatibility that cannot be negotiated. The mature response is not to pretend differences do not exist. It is to face them. A relationship cannot become stronger by hiding reality from itself. This is another principle I would emphasize. Honesty may create difficult conversations, but dishonesty creates difficult futures. The same is true financially. Ignoring debt does not make it disappear. Avoiding retirement planning does not make the future disappear. Refusing to look at spending does not create financial discipline. Pretending that a career is sustainable when your health is collapsing does not make it sustainable. Reality eventually collects its bill. The earlier we look at reality, the more choices we usually have. That is why awareness is such a powerful form of prevention. If you notice that your spending is becoming unhealthy early, you can change. If you notice that a relationship is losing trust early, you can communicate. If you notice that your health is deteriorating early, you can seek help. If you notice that you are repeatedly making choices for external approval, you can examine why. The small warning signs are valuable. Pay attention to them. One of the reasons people ignore warning signs is because they are afraid of what acknowledging them will require. If you admit that your finances are unstable, you may have to change your lifestyle. If you admit that your relationship is unhappy, you may have to have a difficult conversation. If you admit that you are seeking validation, you may have to confront insecurity. But avoidance has a cost. Sometimes the cost is money. Sometimes it is time. Sometimes it is trust. Sometimes it is health. And sometimes it is the slow erosion of self-respect. A better approach is compassionate honesty. Tell yourself the truth without attacking yourself for being human. You can say, I made a poor financial decision. That is different from saying, I am a failure. You can say, I stayed in this relationship because I was afraid. That is different from saying, I am weak. You can say, I wanted sexual validation. That is different from saying, there is something wrong with me. Language matters. The words we use to describe ourselves influence what we believe is possible. If you turn every mistake into an identity, change becomes difficult. If you describe the mistake as a behavior, you create the possibility of changing the behavior. This is why another motivational principle is, do not turn a temporary behavior into a permanent identity. You overspent. That does not mean you are permanently irresponsible. You chose the wrong relationship. That does not mean you are incapable of love. You experienced insecurity. That does not mean you are fundamentally insecure. You made a mistake. That means you have information you did not have before. Use it. Learning is one of the most powerful forms of personal wealth, and, unlike many physical possessions, knowledge can continue producing value long after the original investment. Learn how your body works. Learn about sexual health. Learn about consent. Learn how to communicate. Learn how money works. Learn how debt works. Learn about investing before risking money. Learn how emotional patterns influence decisions. Learn how to recognize manipulation. Learn how to set boundaries. Every useful skill increases your options. That is why I would define personal wealth more broadly than money. Wealth can include financial resources, physical health, emotional resilience, supportive relationships, knowledge, skills, time, and autonomy. Money is one form of capital, but it is not the only form. A person with enormous wealth and no time may not feel free. A person with a high income and terrible health may not feel secure. A person with a successful career and no meaningful relationships may feel lonely. A person with a large social circle but no trusted friends may feel isolated. True freedom requires balance, and balance does not mean dividing everything equally. It means allocating resources according to what matters most. Sometimes your career deserves more attention. Sometimes your health must become the priority. Sometimes your family needs you. Sometimes you need solitude. Sometimes you need adventure. Sometimes you need rest. Your priorities can change. The important thing is to choose them consciously. This is where understanding sexual motivation becomes part of a larger conversation about living intentionally. Sexuality is not separate from the rest of our lives. It interacts with our emotions, relationships, identity, health, and sometimes our understanding of ourselves. If we learn to examine the motivations behind sexual behavior, we can practice a broader skill, examining the motivations behind our decisions in general. Why am I doing this? What do I hope will happen? What am I afraid will happen? What need am I trying to meet? What consequences should I consider? Does this choice align with my values? Will I respect myself tomorrow? These questions are not meant to eliminate spontaneity. They are meant to protect agency. You can still be spontaneous. You can still experience passion. You can still take reasonable risks. You can still pursue pleasure. but you do so with greater awareness, and awareness can actually increase enjoyment, because you are less likely to be haunted by uncertainty. Afterward, when people feel they have acted in accordance with their own values, they often experience a different kind of satisfaction. The experience becomes integrated into their sense of self rather than creating internal conflict. That is why values matter. If honesty matters to you, dishonesty can create distress even when it produces short-term benefits. If financial security matters to you, reckless spending may create anxiety even if the purchase is enjoyable. If autonomy matters to you, controlling relationships may feel suffocating even if there is strong attraction. If emotional intimacy matters to you, purely physical experiences may or may not satisfy you depending on your personal preferences. There is no universal hierarchy. There is your hierarchy, and your responsibility is to understand it. One of the most liberating things a person can discover is that they do not have to justify every healthy preference by proving that everyone else should share it. You can prefer commitment. Someone else can prefer a different relationship structure. You can value saving. Someone else can prioritize spending on experiences. You can want a highly ambitious career. Someone else can want a slower life. The ethical question is whether the choices involve honesty, consent, respect, and responsibility, not whether everyone has identical preferences. Difference does not automatically mean danger, but difference does require communication. And communication requires courage, because once you tell the truth about what you want, another person is free to tell you that they want something different. That possibility can be frightening, but it is also what makes genuine agreement meaningful. If you cannot say no, then yes has less meaning. If someone feels they must agree to avoid punishment, abandonment, financial consequences, or emotional manipulation, the situation is not genuinely free. This is why consent must be understood as active and voluntary, not assumed merely because people are in a relationship. Healthy intimacy leaves room for both people to have agency. A person can change their mind. A person can have a different level of desire. A person can set a boundary. A person can ask questions. A person can say no. And respect for those choices is not a threat to intimacy. It is the foundation of it. The same principle applies to financial decisions within relationships. Both partners deserve meaningful participation in decisions that affect their lives. Financial secrecy can destroy trust, just as sexual dishonesty can destroy trust. Transparency does not mean surrendering every personal boundary, but major shared obligations should not be built on hidden information. Talk about debt before it becomes a crisis. Talk about spending before resentment grows. Talk about financial goals before retirement arrives. Talk about sexual expectations before assumptions become accusations. Talk about boundaries before they are crossed. The earlier the conversation, the more possibilities you usually have. This is the logic of prevention. It is not glamorous, but it is powerful. We often admire dramatic solutions while ignoring small acts of maintenance. A person who becomes financially secure receives praise for their investments, but the foundation may have been years of ordinary budgeting. A couple with strong communication may look naturally compatible, but their strength may have been built through countless difficult conversations. A person who feels comfortable with their sexuality appears naturally confident, but that confidence may have developed through years of learning, self-acceptance, and honest reflection. The visible result hides the invisible process. Do not underestimate the invisible process. That is where freedom is built. A final principle for this part of the journey, one I would want you to carry into every decision. The quality of your life is shaped less by what you occasionally desire than by what you repeatedly choose. You will have impulses. You will experience attraction. You will feel insecure. You will want to spend. You will become frustrated. You will sometimes want immediate relief. None of that makes you weak. What matters is what happens next. Do you pause? Do you reflect? Do you communicate? Do you protect your health? Do you respect another person's autonomy? Do you protect your financial future? Do you learn from the consequences? Do you choose again? that is where character develops, not in the absence of desire, but in the relationship between desire and choice. And perhaps that is the deeper lesson hiding inside the question of why women have sex. We are not merely studying sexual acts, we are studying motivation itself, the extraordinary human ability to pursue pleasure, connection, security, novelty, reassurance, meaning, and countless other experiences, sometimes simultaneously. Once we understand that complexity, we become less interested in judging people from the outside and more interested in understanding what drives our own decisions. We begin to ask better questions. We become more comfortable with individual differences. We stop demanding that every person fit one model. We become more careful with stereotypes. We become more serious about consent. We become more thoughtful about health. And we become more intentional about the lives we build. Because the ultimate goal is not to create a perfect theory of human sexuality. The goal is to become more capable human beings, more capable of understanding ourselves, more capable of listening to others, more capable of making informed choices, more capable of managing money, more capable of creating healthy relationships, more capable of tolerating uncertainty, more capable of accepting that another person's experience may differ from ours, and more capable of choosing a future instead of simply reacting to the present. That is where sexual self-knowledge and financial freedom unexpectedly meet. Both require us to understand what is driving us. Both require us to distinguish genuine values from external pressure. Both require us to think beyond immediate gratification. Both become healthier when we replace shame with information and impulse with awareness. And both ultimately lead back to one question: what kind of life are you trying to build? Once you can answer that honestly, many smaller decisions become clearer. You know what deserves your money. You know what deserves your time. You know which relationships deserve your trust. You know which boundaries matter. You know which risks are worth taking. You know which desires can be explored responsibly. And you begin to understand that freedom is not the absence of limits. Freedom is having enough awareness to choose your limits consciously. That is a far more powerful kind of freedom. And it begins with a simple act that costs nothing at all. Listen. Ask yourself why. Then choose with intention. There is a moment in almost every important relationship when the excitement of discovery begins to meet the reality of everyday life. At the beginning, attraction can make everything feel effortless. A message creates anticipation. A glance creates electricity. A touch seems to carry an entire conversation. We notice the things that make the other person fascinating, and we naturally pay less attention to the differences that might eventually require negotiation. But as familiarity grows, another question quietly appears: what does intimacy mean when the novelty becomes ordinary? What happens when desire changes? What happens when one person's needs are different from the others? What happens when love remains strong but the way people experience sex no longer looks the same? These questions are not signs that something has necessarily gone wrong. They are signs that a relationship has moved from fantasy into reality, and reality requires communication. One of the most valuable lessons we can draw from the study of women's sexual motivations is that sexual desire is not an isolated force operating independently of the rest of life. It can be influenced by emotional connection, physical health, stress, relationship satisfaction, self-image, circumstances, expectations, and countless other factors. This means that when desire changes, the explanation may not simply be, "I am no longer attracted to my partner." Sometimes the body is responding to exhaustion. Sometimes the mind is overwhelmed. Sometimes resentment has accumulated. Sometimes the relationship feels emotionally distant. Sometimes medication, health conditions, hormonal changes, or life transitions matter. Sometimes nothing is wrong at all. Desire simply fluctuates. That distinction is incredibly important because people often turn a change in sexual desire into a judgment about their entire relationship or their entire identity. A woman may wonder, "Why don't I feel the way I used to?" A partner may immediately interpret that as rejection. The couple then begins reacting to assumptions rather than understanding what is actually happening. One person pursues reassurance, the other feels pressured. The pressure creates more distance. The distance creates more anxiety. Soon the original issue has been buried beneath a new layer of conflict. This is why curiosity is so much more useful than accusation. Instead of saying, "Why don't you want me anymore?" a more constructive question might be, "How have you been feeling lately, and is there anything affecting how you experience intimacy?" The second question does not assume an answer. It creates room for one. That room matters. Human beings need psychological safety in order to speak honestly about vulnerable subjects. Sexuality is one of the most vulnerable subjects because it touches identity, attractiveness, desirability, insecurity, and fear of rejection. If every honest statement is punished with anger or humiliation, people learn to hide. And once people begin hiding, the relationship becomes increasingly dependent on guesswork. Healthy intimacy requires the opposite. It requires the ability to say, "This feels good." It requires the ability to say, "This does not feel good." It requires the ability to say, "I am not sure." It requires the ability to say, "I need something different." It requires the ability to say, "I love you, but I am struggling." And perhaps, most importantly, it requires the ability to hear those statements without immediately turning them into accusations against ourselves. That is difficult because rejection hurts. When someone we loved does not want what we want, our minds can quickly convert a specific situation into a global judgment. "She does not want sex tonight," becomes "she does not desire me." "She needs more emotional connection," becomes "I am failing." "She wants more independence," becomes "I am losing her." But these conclusions may not be accurate. A specific behavior is not always a complete statement about a person's feelings. This is another principle worth remembering. Do not turn one moment into a verdict on an entire relationship. A relationship is a pattern over time, not a single evening. The same principle applies to finances. One expensive month does not necessarily mean financial ruin. One poor investment does not necessarily define your entire financial future. One career setback does not prove that you are incapable of success. What matters is the pattern and what you do next. This is where resilience becomes essential. Financial freedom is not achieved because a person never makes mistakes. It is built because the person develops the ability to recover from mistakes. They maintain emergency reserves where possible. They avoid unnecessary high-interest debt. They diversify risk appropriately. They keep learning. They adjust their plan when circumstances change. Relationships require a similar resilience. You will misunderstand each other. You will have different moods. You will disappoint one another. You will sometimes want different things. You will occasionally say the wrong thing. The goal is not to eliminate every disagreement. The goal is to develop the skills necessary to repair damage. Repair may mean apologizing. It may mean clarifying. It may mean changing behavior. It may mean establishing a new agreement. It may mean accepting a boundary. And sometimes, unfortunately, it may mean recognizing that the relationship cannot continue in its current form. Not every relationship can be repaired. Not every incompatibility can be negotiated. That is why honesty is so important. If two people have fundamentally different expectations about intimacy, commitment, finances, children, lifestyle, or personal freedom, ignoring the differences will not make them disappear. The couple may remain together physically while becoming increasingly disconnected emotionally. The healthiest relationships, not necessarily those in which two people want exactly the same things. They are often those in which differences can be discussed without fear. This is especially relevant when thinking about sexual desire. People vary tremendously in how often they want sexual intimacy, what circumstances increase or decrease their interest, and what meaning they attach to sex. There is no universal level that defines a correct relationship. What matters is whether the people involved can communicate honestly and reach arrangements that respect both people's autonomy. That means rejecting the idea that one partner automatically owes sex to the other. A relationship does not create permanent sexual entitlement. Marriage does not eliminate consent. Love does not eliminate consent. Past intimacy does not create future obligation. Consent must remain voluntary and ongoing. This principle is not merely a legal or ethical technicality, it is fundamental to genuine intimacy. Intimacy has meaning precisely because it involves choice. When choice disappears, intimacy becomes something fundamentally different. A healthy relationship therefore creates a paradox. Security without ownership. You can build commitment while recognizing that the other person remains free. You can make promises without pretending you own another human being. You can create shared financial goals while preserving individual dignity. You can experience deep intimacy while allowing each person to remain a separate individual. That balance is not always easy, but it is worth pursuing. The same concept appears in financial independence. Suppose a person remains in a relationship because they have no access to money, no savings, no employable skills, and no practical alternatives. Even if the relationship appears stable from the outside, the person's freedom may be severely limited. This is why financial literacy can be part of personal empowerment. A woman who understands her finances is better positioned to make decisions based on her values rather than pure financial fear. She does not have to be wealthy. She does not have to manage every dollar perfectly. She simply needs enough knowledge and resources to understand her situation and gradually increase her options. A useful financial freedom principle is, the first goal of wealth is not luxury. It is leverage over your own choices. An emergency fund can create breathing room. A marketable skill can create career flexibility. A manageable debt load can reduce pressure. Savings can create the ability to leave an unhealthy environment. Retirement planning can reduce dependence on future circumstances. Financial education can reduce vulnerability to manipulation. Money cannot solve every problem, but financial resilience can expand the range of choices available when problems occur. That is why we should not treat financial freedom as an entirely separate subject from relationships. Money influences relationships. Economic pressure can affect stress, conflict, housing decisions, family planning, career choices, and the ability to leave unsafe situations. Couples who avoid financial conversations may eventually discover that their disagreement about money was actually a disagreement about values. One person may see money as security, another may see it as enjoyment. One may prefer saving, another may prefer experiences. One may want a predictable future, another may be comfortable with risk. None of these perspectives is automatically irrational, but they must be discussed. Ask, what does money mean to you? That question can reveal far more than, how much do you want to save? Perhaps one person grew up watching parents struggle financially and therefore saves aggressively. Perhaps another grew up in a family where money was abundant and therefore feels comfortable spending. Perhaps someone uses purchases as a reward because they associate consumption with love. Perhaps someone avoids spending because scarcity created anxiety. Behind the numbers are stories. And if you want to change financial behavior, sometimes you have to understand the story. The same is true of sexuality. Behind a desire may be a story about affection, confidence, fear, curiosity, identity, or connection. Understanding the story does not mean every behavior should be accepted. It means we have more information, and more information creates better choices. This is why judgment should not be confused with wisdom. Judgment says, I know why you did that. Wisdom says, I want to understand what happened before I decide what it means. That distinction is valuable in relationships, parenting, leadership, and personal development. It is also valuable when we think about gender. Women have often been placed inside contradictory categories, innocent or seductive, independent or nurturing. sexually confident, or socially respectable. These categories are too small for actual human beings. A woman can be ambitious and affectionate. She can be sexually curious and deeply committed. She can value independence and want intimacy. She can want a career and a family. She can enjoy physical pleasure and still have strong boundaries. Human complexity should not be treated as inconsistency. People contain multiple dimensions. That is normal. And this is where we should be careful with broad claims about what women are. Research can identify tendencies, but individual experiences remain individual. If we use research to tell someone what she must feel, we have stopped using science to understand people and started using it to stereotype them. The goal of research should be greater understanding, not narrower identity. A powerful principle is use knowledge to expand possibilities, not to build cages. This principle extends beyond sexuality. Financial knowledge should not make you terrified to spend. It should help you spend wisely. Relationship knowledge should not make you suspicious of everyone. It should help you communicate more effectively. Health knowledge should not make you obsessed with every symptom. It should help you make informed decisions. Psychological knowledge should not make you analyze every emotion endlessly. It should help you recognize patterns and choose appropriate responses. Knowledge is most useful when it improves action. That is why we should always ask, what will I do differently because I understand this? Suppose you discover that stress affects your desire. The useful response may be to look at your workload, sleep, health, and emotional environment. Suppose you discover that financial stress is creating conflict in your relationship. The useful response may be to create a shared budget, clarify responsibilities, reduce unnecessary expenses, and discuss long-term goals. Suppose you discover that you seek validation because you feel insecure. The useful response may be to develop confidence through skills, supportive friendships, meaningful work, therapy when appropriate, and self-respect. Insight becomes powerful when it changes behavior. This is one of the reasons I would encourage people not to seek self-knowledge merely as an intellectual exercise. Do not simply ask, why am I like this? Ask, now that I understand this pattern, what can I do with that knowledge? That is the difference between awareness and transformation. And transformation does not have to be dramatic. Perhaps you begin by changing one conversation, one spending habit, one boundary, one assumption, one routine, one way of responding to conflict. Small changes become meaningful when repeated. That is how compounding works in finance. It is also how it works in human behavior. A small amount of money invested consistently can grow over time. A small improvement in communication repeated consistently can strengthen a relationship. A small reduction in unnecessary spending can eventually create substantial breathing room. A small increase in emotional awareness can prevent countless reactive decisions. A small habit of asking instead of assuming can transform the way you relate to other people. This is why patience is a financial principle and a relationship principle. Do not expect immediate results from every healthy decision. A person who begins saving today may not feel wealthy tomorrow. A couple who begins communicating honestly may not suddenly become perfectly connected. Progress takes time. Trust takes time. Skills take time. Financial security takes time. Emotional maturity takes time. And perhaps the greatest mistake we make is expecting the future to reward us immediately for doing the right thing. Sometimes the reward arrives years later. That is why discipline matters. But discipline should not be confused with punishment. A sustainable financial plan should leave room for enjoyment. A sustainable relationship should leave room for spontaneity. A sustainable health plan should leave room for living. A sustainable life should not feel like an endless exercise in deprivation. This is especially important because extreme restriction often creates rebound behavior. If you tell yourself you can never enjoy anything, eventually the pressure may become unbearable. Instead, create a system that accommodates pleasure within your values. Financially, that may mean creating a joy category in your budget. Relationally, It may mean intentionally protecting time for fun. Personally, it may mean allowing yourself to explore interests without turning every activity into a productivity project. Sexually, it means recognizing that pleasure can be a legitimate human experience while still maintaining health, consent, communication, and responsibility. Pleasure does not have to be defended as something shameful. It also does not have to be treated as the highest possible good. It can simply be one part of a balanced human life. This balance is important because people sometimes swing between extremes. They either treat sex as something sacred that must always carry profound emotional meaning, or they treat it as meaningless entertainment. But real human experience is more varied. Sometimes sex is deeply emotional. Sometimes it is playful. Sometimes it is connected to commitment. Sometimes it is exploratory. Sometimes people choose not to have it at all. There is no need to force every experience into one category. What matters is whether the experience is consistent with the person's values and whether everyone involved is participating freely and responsibly. And when two people's values differ, honesty becomes essential. Imagine one partner believes sex is primarily a form of emotional bonding, while the other sees it as one expression of physical affection among many. Neither person can simply declare their definition universally correct. They need to understand each other. What does this mean to you? What do you need? What are you comfortable with? What are you not comfortable with? What would make you feel respected? What would make you feel pressured? These conversations may initially feel awkward, but awkward honesty is usually healthier than comfortable misunderstanding. That principle applies to money as well. What does financial security mean to you? What are you afraid of? What are you willing to sacrifice? What do you want your money to make possible? What kind of lifestyle do you actually want? What does retirement look like in your imagination? These questions move couples beyond numbers into values, and once values are clear, practical decisions become easier. If you both value freedom, perhaps you prioritize savings. If you both value travel, perhaps you create a travel fund. If one person values security more strongly, perhaps you build a larger emergency reserve. If you disagree about spending, perhaps you create both shared and individual discretionary money. The goal is not to win. The goal is to build a system both people can live with. This is another important financial freedom principle. A good financial plan is not the one that looks perfect on paper. It is the one you can follow consistently without destroying the rest of your life. The same is true of relationship agreements. An agreement that looks perfect but cannot be maintained is not useful. A realistic agreement that respects both people and can evolve over time may be much stronger. Relationships change. Bodies change. Careers change. Families change. Financial circumstances change. Desire can change. Therefore, agreements sometimes need to change too. Changing an agreement does not necessarily mean the original commitment was a failure. It means the people involved are responding to reality. Imagine a couple who built their entire financial plan around full-time incomes. Then one person becomes responsible for caring for an aging parent. The old plan may no longer work. Adjusting it is not betrayal, it is adaptation. Similarly, a couple may experience changes in sexual desire because of stress, health, pregnancy, childbirth, aging, medication, or other life circumstances. Treating the relationship as a rigid contract that cannot adapt may create unnecessary suffering. The mature response is to ask, what does our relationship need now? Not what did it need 5 years ago. Not what another couple needs. Now. This focus on the present does not mean ignoring the future. It means responding to reality while keeping long-term values in view. And perhaps this is one of the deepest forms of intelligence. The ability to hold to truths at once. You can love someone and still need boundaries. You can desire independence and still want connection. You can enjoy money and still value simplicity. You can experience sexual desire and still choose not to act on it. You can be financially successful and still feel anxious. You can be in love and still disagree. You can be uncertain and still make a good decision. Human life is full of apparent contradictions. Wisdom is learning to navigate them rather than pretending they do not exist. This is also why we should resist the idea that there is one universal path to happiness. Some people thrive in long-term monogamous relationships. Some people choose other consensual relationship structures. Some people prioritize family life. Others prioritize career or creative work. Some want children. Others do not. Some people are highly sexually motivated. Others experience little or no sexual interest. Some people enjoy risk. Others prefer stability. Individual differences are not errors in the human system. They are part of the human system. The ethical foundation remains important. Honesty, informed choice, consent, respect, and responsibility. Within those principles, people can have meaningful differences, that is, freedom with boundaries. And boundaries are not the opposite of freedom. They are what make freedom workable. Your boundary tells another person where your autonomy begins. Their boundary tells you where theirs begins. Healthy relationships do not erase those lines. They learn to respect them. The same applies to financial boundaries. You may decide that you will never borrow money for a luxury purchase. Someone else may make a different choice. You may decide that you need an emergency fund before investing. Another person may have a different risk tolerance. Your financial plan should be based on your circumstances, goals, and informed understanding, not on blindly copying someone else's strategy. This is why financial freedom is deeply personal. There is no universal number that guarantees everyone will feel free. For one person, freedom may mean leaving a stressful job. For another, it may mean retiring early. For another, it may mean simply eliminating high-interest debt. For another, it may mean having enough savings to take 6 months away from work. Define your freedom. Then build toward it. And the same question can be asked about relationships. What does emotional freedom mean to you? What does sexual well-being mean to you? What does a healthy relationship look like? What boundaries are non-negotiable? What are you willing to compromise on? What are you not willing to compromise on? These questions require courage because the answers may force you to confront the difference between the life you have and the life you actually want. But clarity is a gift. Once you know, you can act. Before you know, you are mostly reacting, and reactive living can become exhausting. You respond to other people's expectations. You respond to financial emergencies. You respond to relationship conflict. You respond to anxiety. You respond to temptation. You respond to comparison. Intentional living changes the sequence. You decide what matters. You create systems. You communicate. You prepare. Then, when life inevitably surprises you, you have a foundation from which to respond. This is why financial reserves matter. They are not just piles of money. They are stored options. And this is why emotional resilience matters. It is not just confidence. It is stored capacity to cope with difficulty. Skills are stored options. Knowledge is stored options. Supportive relationships are stored options. Health is stored capacity. Freedom grows when you develop resources that increase your ability to respond to change. That is why I would phrase another motivational principle this way. Build your life so that a difficult day does not have the power to destroy your entire future. You cannot eliminate uncertainty. You can become more resilient to it. And resilience is not about becoming invulnerable. It is about becoming adaptable. If something changes, you adjust. If a relationship changes, you communicate. If your income changes, you reassess your expenses. If your health changes, you seek appropriate care. If your desires change, you examine what those changes mean. If an old belief no longer fits, you reconsider it. You are allowed to update your life. That may be one of the greatest freedoms available to us. We are not obligated to remain identical to who we were 5 years ago. Growth means that new information can change our decisions. Experience can change our priorities. Maturity can change our boundaries. Knowledge can change our beliefs. And that is not weakness. That is learning. So, as we continue exploring women's sexual motivations, Remember that the real subject is larger than sex. It is about the human search for pleasure, connection, security, meaning, validation, freedom, and understanding. It is about the ways our minds and bodies interact with our relationships and circumstances. It is about how we interpret our desires and what we choose to do with them. And the more we understand those forces, the less we need simplistic answers. We can become more compassionate without becoming naive, more informed without becoming judgmental, more independent without becoming isolated, more financially secure without becoming obsessed with money, more sexually aware without reducing ourselves to sexuality, more connected without surrendering autonomy. That is the balance worth pursuing. Because a fulfilling life is not built by maximizing one human need while ignoring all the others. It is built by learning how different needs interact and by making choices that respect the whole person. Your body matters. Your emotions matter. Your relationships matter. Your health matters. Your financial security matters. Your autonomy matters. Your future matters. And when you bring those dimensions together, you stop asking only, "What do I want right now?" You begin asking the more powerful question, "What choice allows the person I am today and the person I hope to become tomorrow to coexist peacefully?" That is where desire becomes wisdom. That is where money becomes a tool rather than a master. That is where relationships become partnership rather than prisons. And that is where freedom begins to feel less like rebellion and more like responsibility. I can continue with part 5. But I can't rewrite or closely transform why women have sex into a substitute for the book. And I can't write it as though Cindy Meston herself were delivering it. I can, however, create an original, professional, story-driven speech based on the broad themes of sexual motivation, relationships, self-awareness, personal empowerment, and financial independence, without reproducing the book's text or imitating Meston's personal voice. There is a point in every person's life when the questions become more important than the answers. We spend years learning what we are supposed to want, how we are supposed to behave, what a successful relationship should look like, what a successful career should look like, and even what happiness should feel like. Then, somewhere along the way, reality interrupts the script. We discover that what looks perfect from the outside may not feel fulfilling on the inside. We discover that attraction does not automatically create compatibility, that money does not automatically create security, and that being wanted does not automatically make a person feel worthy. We discover that human motivation is far more complicated than the stories we were taught. And that discovery can be uncomfortable, but it can also be liberating. Imagine a woman who has spent years believing that being desirable is one of the most important measures of her worth. She receives compliments, attention, romantic interest, and admiration, and for a while those experiences feel like evidence that she is doing well, but then the attention changes. Perhaps she enters a long-term relationship. Perhaps she gets older. Perhaps her body changes. Perhaps she becomes exhausted by the pressure of always appearing attractive. Suddenly, the external evidence she once relied upon becomes less predictable. She may find herself asking a difficult question, "Who am I?" when nobody is validating me. That question can be frightening because external validation is powerful. When another person finds us attractive, chooses us, wants to spend time with us, or expresses desire toward us, we receive an immediate emotional reward. But if our entire sense of value depends on that reward, we become vulnerable to its disappearance. We begin chasing something outside ourselves to maintain a feeling that must ultimately be built from within. This is not a criticism of wanting to be desired. Being desired can be wonderful. Attraction can be exciting. Romantic attention can be deeply affirming. The problem begins when affirmation becomes dependence. There is a difference between saying, "It feels wonderful that someone I care about finds me attractive," and saying, "I cannot feel valuable unless someone finds me attractive." The first is connection. The second is vulnerability, and the same distinction appears in financial life. It is perfectly reasonable to enjoy earning money. It is wonderful to achieve financial goals, buy things you value, travel, support your family, or create opportunities for yourself. But there is a difference between using money as a tool and using money as proof that you matter. When income becomes the primary measure of identity, every financial setback becomes an emotional crisis. A promotion feels like confirmation of worth. A failed business feels like personal humiliation. A smaller paycheck feels like a reduction in human value. Money can measure resources, but it cannot measure your humanity. Likewise, sexual attention can communicate attraction, but it cannot measure your entire worth. This distinction may sound simple, but living it requires practice. We are surrounded by messages that encourage comparison. We see carefully edited photographs, carefully selected achievements, carefully presented relationships, carefully constructed careers. We are constantly exposed to other people's outcomes without seeing the uncertainty, sacrifice, conflict, debt, disappointment, insecurity, or private struggle behind them. Comparison therefore gives us incomplete information. And incomplete information can produce terrible decisions. A person may spend money she does not have because she wants to look successful. A person may remain in a relationship because leaving would make her feel unsuccessful. A person may pursue sexual attention because she wants proof that she is desirable. A person may accept treatment that violates her boundaries because she fears that demanding respect will cause someone to leave. These decisions may appear irrational from the outside. But once we understand the emotional need beneath them, they become easier to understand. Understanding is not the same as approving. That distinction matters. If you understand why someone spends impulsively, you are not saying impulsive spending is financially healthy. If you understand why someone seeks validation, you are not saying dependence on validation is sustainable. If you understand why someone remains in an unhealthy relationship, you are not saying the situation should continue. Understanding simply gives you a clearer map, and a clearer map gives you a better chance of choosing another road. One of the most important principles of personal growth is this: you cannot change a pattern you refuse to see. This is why honest self-reflection can be so powerful. Ask yourself where you repeatedly compromise your values. Ask yourself what situations make you feel smaller. Ask yourself which choices leave you peaceful afterward and which choices leave you anxious, ashamed, or resentful. Ask yourself what you are pursuing and what you are actually hoping to feel when you achieve it. You may discover that your goals have been borrowed. Perhaps you thought you wanted a particular lifestyle because everyone around you treated it as success. Perhaps you thought you wanted a particular relationship because society told you that being partnered was proof that you were desirable. Perhaps you thought you wanted a high income because you believed financial success would finally silence your insecurity. But once you examine those goals carefully, you may realize that what you really want is freedom, and freedom can be much cheaper than the image of success you are trying to purchase. Maybe you do not need the enormous house. Maybe you need a safe and comfortable home with manageable expenses. Maybe you do not need an expensive car. Maybe you need reliable transportation and the ability to save. Maybe you do not need to work every waking hour. Maybe you need enough income and financial discipline to buy back your time. This leads to one of the most important financial freedom principles. Do not work endlessly to afford a life you are too exhausted to enjoy. Income matters, but so does time. A person can increase their salary while simultaneously increasing their obligations until the additional income produces little additional freedom. Lifestyle inflation can quietly consume raises. Every increase in earnings can become another reason to increase spending. The result is a strange paradox. Earning more, but feeling no freer. Financial independence requires breaking that cycle. When your income increases, consider allowing part of the increase to strengthen your future rather than immediately increasing your lifestyle. Build savings. Reduce expensive debt. Invest according to an appropriate strategy and risk tolerance. Develop valuable skills. Create an emergency reserve. Protect your health. By time. The goal is not to become obsessed with accumulation. The goal is to create choices. Imagine waking up one morning and realizing that you can leave a toxic workplace because you have savings. Imagine being able to take time away from work when your family needs you. Imagine being able to make relationship decisions without the terrifying knowledge that one person's paycheck determines whether you can survive. Imagine being able to say no to an opportunity that violates your values because you do not desperately need the money. That is what money can do at its best. It can create breathing room. And breathing room is a form of freedom. But there is another kind of breathing room that relationships need. Emotional breathing room. When two people love each other, it can be tempting to expect the relationship to satisfy every emotional need. We want our partner to be our best friend, therapist, financial partner, source of excitement, source of reassurance, sexual partner, intellectual companion, and constant emotional anchor. No single person can realistically perform every role perfectly. Healthy relationships become stronger when people have multiple sources of support. Friends matter. Family matters. Community matters. Personal interests matter. Professional support can matter. Solitude matters. This does not diminish romantic love. It protects it from carrying impossible expectations. A partner should not have to become your entire world in order to prove that they love you, and you should not have to disappear into another person's life to prove that you love them. There is strength in remaining an individual while participating in a partnership. That means maintaining some personal interests. It means having your own thoughts. It means developing your own abilities. It means understanding your own finances. It means knowing what you believe. It means being capable of saying, "This is important to me," and it means allowing your partner to have that same freedom. The healthiest relationships not built from two people trying to possess each other. They are built from two people repeatedly choosing to participate in each other's lives. Choice is central. Choice is what gives commitment its meaning. If a person cannot leave, their staying tells us less about love. If a person stays despite having alternatives, their continued participation can carry a different meaning. This is why empowerment matters. A person who has choices can make decisions from desire rather than desperation, and financial independence can expand those choices dramatically. That is why I would encourage everyone, regardless of gender, to learn the fundamentals of personal finance. Know where your money goes. Understand your obligations. Maintain appropriate savings. Learn about investing before committing capital. Be cautious with high-interest debt. Develop skills that increase your earning power. Protect yourself against financial manipulation. Know what financial commitments you are entering. You do not need to become a financial expert overnight. Start with awareness. The first month may simply involve tracking expenses. The next may involve eliminating unnecessary fees. Then, perhaps you establish an emergency reserve. Then you learn about retirement accounts and diversified investing. Then you create measurable goals. Financial freedom is usually not one heroic decision. It is a collection of ordinary decisions, repeated long enough to create extraordinary results. The same principle applies to emotional freedom. You do not become confident because you wake up one morning and decide never to feel insecure again. You become more secure by repeatedly practicing honesty, setting boundaries, developing competence, tolerating rejection, maintaining supportive relationships, and learning to respect yourself. Confidence is often the accumulated evidence that you can handle life. You handle one difficult conversation, then another. You survive one disappointment, then another. You learn one new skill. Then another. You make one responsible financial choice, then another. Eventually your mind begins to say, "I have evidence that I can take care of myself." That is a powerful psychological transformation. It changes the way you approach relationships. When you trust yourself, you become less desperate for someone else's approval. You can appreciate affection without depending on it. You can enjoy attraction without needing to turn it into a relationship. You can walk away from disrespect You can say no without believing that rejection makes you unlovable. You can say yes without feeling that you must continue saying yes forever. And you can communicate your desires more honestly because your entire identity is not hanging on the response. That is sexual empowerment at its healthiest. Not the pursuit of endless sexual experiences, but the ability to make intimate decisions, consciously, freely, safely, and consistently with your values. Sometimes that means saying yes. Sometimes it means saying no. Sometimes it means waiting. Sometimes it means asking more questions. Sometimes it means recognizing that you want something different from what you once wanted. Changing your mind is not hypocrisy. It is part of being human. Our circumstances change. Our bodies change. Our relationships change. Our priorities change. Our understanding changes. We should expect some evolution, but evolution does not mean abandoning responsibility. If anything, greater self-knowledge creates greater responsibility. When you understand yourself better, you become more accountable for the choices you make. That is why personal freedom and personal responsibility belong together. You cannot reasonably demand freedom while refusing to acknowledge consequences. If you choose to spend, accept the effect on savings. If you choose to borrow, understand the repayment. If you choose to enter a relationship, recognize that another person's emotions and expectations are involved. If you choose sexual intimacy, consider consent, sexual health, contraception where relevant, and the possibility of emotional consequences. If you choose to leave, recognize that freedom may still involve grief. Every meaningful choice has a cost, but not every cost is a reason to avoid the choice. Sometimes the cost of staying is greater than the cost of leaving. Sometimes the cost of saving is temporary limitation, while the reward is future independence. Sometimes the cost of an honest conversation is discomfort, while the reward is clarity. Sometimes the cost of setting a boundary is losing someone who refuses to respect it, while the reward is preserving yourself. This is why we should stop thinking of every difficult consequence as evidence that we made the wrong choice. Some good decisions are difficult. Some bad decisions feel wonderful initially. Short-term comfort is not a reliable measure of long-term wisdom. That lesson is essential for financial freedom. Debt can provide immediate pleasure while creating future pressure. Saving can create immediate limitation while creating future freedom. Investing requires patience because the reward is delayed. Skill development requires effort before it produces income. Likewise, healthy relationships often require difficult conversations before they produce greater intimacy. Boundaries can initially create tension before they create respect. Honesty can initially produce conflict before it creates clarity. Personal growth is often uncomfortable because it asks us to give up familiar patterns. Familiar does not mean healthy. A person can become accustomed to anxiety. A person can become accustomed to overspending. A person can become accustomed to unhealthy relationships. A person can become accustomed to seeking approval. When a pattern is familiar, changing it can initially feel wrong simply because it is new. This is why persistence matters. Give healthy choices time to become familiar. If you begin saving, do not abandon the plan because the first few months do not make you wealthy. If you establish a boundary, do not abandon it because someone reacts badly. If you begin communicating honestly, do not expect every conversation to go perfectly. If you start building self-respect, do not assume you have failed because insecurity returns. Progress is not a straight line. You can move forward and still have difficult days. You can become stronger and still feel afraid. You can become financially responsible and still make an occasional mistake. You can build a healthy relationship and still have conflict. The presence of difficulty does not mean the process has failed. What matters is direction. This gives us another principle. Measure your life by direction, not by perfection. Ask whether you are moving toward greater health, greater freedom, greater honesty, greater stability, and a greater alignment with your values. If the answer is yes, keep going. There will always be someone richer, someone more attractive, someone more successful, someone with a more exciting relationship, someone who appears more confident, someone who seems to have figured everything out. Let them. Your life is not a competition against an imaginary scoreboard. The goal is not to win someone else's game. The goal is to understand your own. What do you value? What are you building? Who do you want to become? What kind of relationships do you want? What kind of financial future do you want? What kind of person do you want to be when circumstances become difficult, or those questions are more important than appearances? Because eventually, appearances fade. Money can disappear. Jobs can change. Bodies age. Relationships evolve. Circumstances shift. The things that remain most valuable are the internal resources you have developed: knowledge, adaptability, integrity, emotional resilience, practical skills, supportive relationships, and the ability to make thoughtful choices. These are forms of wealth that cannot be measured entirely by a bank statement. And this brings us back to sexuality. A person's sexual life should not be reduced to how desirable they appear, how frequently they have sex, how many partners they have had, or how closely their behavior resembles somebody else's. Sexual well-being is much broader. It includes the ability to understand one's own desires, communicate boundaries, make informed choices, protect health, experience pleasure without unnecessary shame, and participate in relationships characterized by mutual respect. That definition leaves room for enormous individual variation. Some people will want more sexual intimacy. Some will want less. Some will prioritize emotional connection. Some will place greater emphasis on physical pleasure. Some will experience strong sexual desire. Some will experience little. Some will change over time. The important thing is not to force everyone into one definition. Human beings deserve room to be human. And perhaps one of the greatest dangers in discussing sexuality is that we become so eager to explain other people that we stop listening to them. Research can identify patterns. Statistics can reveal tendencies. Psychology can offer frameworks. But the individual person still has a voice. Listen to it. If someone says, "This is what intimacy means to me," take that seriously. If someone says, "This is my boundary," respect it. If someone says, "I don't know what I want yet," allow uncertainty. If someone says, "My priorities have changed," explore the change rather than immediately condemning it, and offer yourself the same courtesy. You do not have to have every answer today. You can be a work in progress. You can learn. You can reconsider. You can grow. That is not indecision. That is development. The same principle applies to money. You do not have to understand every investment product today. You can begin by learning the basics. You do not need to become wealthy immediately. You can begin by spending less than you earn where possible and building a margin. You do not need a perfect career. You can develop skills that increase your options over time. The most important thing is to begin. Start where you are. Use what you have. Learn what you do not know. Then improve. Financial freedom is often described as a destination, but it is better understood as increasing control over your resources and your time. Every sensible step that reduces unnecessary dependence increases that control. Emotional freedom works similarly. Every step that reduces dependence on external validation increases your ability to choose. Healthy sexuality works similarly. Every step that increases knowledge, consent, communication, and self-awareness increases your ability to choose. Choice is the common thread. And choice is precious. So protect it. Protect your financial choices by avoiding unnecessary obligations. Protect your emotional choices by developing self-respect. Protect your relationship choices by maintaining honest communication. Protect your sexual choices by understanding health and consent. Protect your future choices by thinking beyond today. One day, you will look back at the decisions you are making now. You will not remember every purchase. You will not remember every conversation. You will not remember every moment of uncertainty. But you may remember whether you lived according to your values, whether you protected your health, whether you treated people with respect, whether you allowed yourself to be treated with respect, whether you built financial stability, whether you had the courage to change when the old life no longer fit. That is the legacy of intentional living. Not perfection, not universal approval. Not an image of success, but alignment. Your actions increasingly resemble your values. Your money increasingly serves your priorities. Your relationships increasingly reflect mutual respect. Your choices increasingly belong to you. And when that happens, something remarkable occurs. You stop needing every decision to impress somebody else. You can choose a quieter life without feeling like you failed. You can save money without feeling deprived. You can leave a relationship that no longer respects you without believing you have lost. You can enjoy intimacy without turning it into a test of your worth. You can experience desire without being controlled by it. You can want success without becoming a slave to status. You can pursue pleasure without abandoning responsibility. You can love another person deeply without abandoning yourself. That is not a small achievement. That is freedom. And perhaps the most important motivational principle of all is this: build a life that gives you more reasons to respect yourself than reasons to seek approval. When your decisions are guided by that principle, the questions begin to change. Instead of asking, will they think I'm attractive? You ask, do I feel comfortable in my own skin? Instead of asking, does this purchase make me look successful? You ask, does this purchase support the life I want? Instead of asking, how do I keep someone from leaving? You ask, are we building a relationship in which both people are free to stay? Instead of asking, how much money do I need to prove that I've made it? You ask, how much financial independence do I need to live according to my values? Instead of asking, what should a woman want? You ask, what do I genuinely want, and how can I pursue it responsibly? Those questions lead to different lives. They lead away from performance and toward authenticity. Away from fear and toward awareness. Away from dependence and toward capability. Away from impulsive consumption and toward intentional living. Away from stereotypes and toward curiosity. And perhaps that is the real power of understanding human motivation. The more clearly we understand why people make choices, the more compassionate we can become toward others and the more honest we can become with ourselves. You do not need to eliminate desire. You need to understand it. You do not need to eliminate ambition. You need to direct it. You do not need to eliminate pleasure. You need to place it within a life that can sustain it. You do not need to eliminate risk. You need to understand which risks you are taking and why. And you do not need to eliminate uncertainty. You need to become capable of making thoughtful decisions despite it. That is maturity. That is empowerment. And that is the bridge between understanding yourself and building a life that actually belongs to you. By now, perhaps the most important realization is that the question of why people seek sexual intimacy cannot be separated from the larger question of what people are trying to build with their lives. We may begin by asking about desire, attraction, pleasure, connection, or relationships, but eventually we arrive at something much deeper: the human need to make choices that feel meaningful. Sexuality is one part of that story. Money is another. Career, friendship, family, health, identity, and personal freedom are others. All of them compete for our limited time, energy, attention, and resources, and the quality of our lives depends, in large part, on whether we understand those competing demands well enough to make deliberate choices rather than simply reacting to whatever feels strongest in the moment. Imagine standing at the end of a long road and looking backward. You see hundreds of small decisions. Some seemed important at the time, others seemed insignificant. A conversation you decided to have, a boundary you decided to establish, a relationship you decided to leave, a person you decided to trust, a financial habit you decided to change, a skill you decided to learn, a moment when you said yes, another when you finally said no. None of those decisions existed in isolation. They accumulated. They became patterns. The patterns became a lifestyle, and eventually, that lifestyle became a life. This is why our daily choices deserve more attention, than we sometimes give them. We tend to imagine that major life transformations come from dramatic moments. Occasionally they do, but much more often, transformation is quiet. It happens when someone begins saving a small amount of money every month. It happens when someone stops accepting disrespect simply because they are afraid of being alone. It happens when someone learns to communicate instead of assuming. It happens when someone finally seeks reliable information about their health. It happens when someone decides that external approval will no longer be the primary measure of their worth. Those decisions rarely look revolutionary, but they can be. Do not wait for a crisis to begin caring about what matters. Maintenance is not boring when you understand what it protects. Your health deserves maintenance. Your finances deserve maintenance. Your relationships deserve maintenance. Your mental well-being deserves maintenance. Your skills deserve maintenance. Your sense of purpose deserves maintenance. A life is not built once. It is continually maintained. And this brings us to another important reality. No person can guarantee the outcome of every decision. You can communicate honestly and still be misunderstood. You can save money and still encounter an unexpected crisis. You can take care of your health and still become ill. You can love someone deeply and still discover that the relationship cannot continue. You can make a thoughtful career decision and still experience failure. The goal of wisdom is not to eliminate uncertainty. It is to prepare for it. That means developing resilience rather than demanding guarantees. Resilience is built through resources. Financial resources. Social resources. Knowledge. Health. Skills. Emotional regulation. Community. Self-trust. When you have several forms of support, one setback is less likely to destroy everything. This is why diversification is such a useful metaphor for life. In finance, diversification reduces dependence on one investment. In relationships, a broad support network reduces dependence on one person. In career development, multiple skills reduce dependence on one narrow role. In emotional well-being, multiple sources of meaning reduce dependence on one form of validation. Do not put your entire life into one account. Build several sources of strength. Have people you trust. Have skills you can use. Have financial habits that protect your future. Have interests that make life enjoyable. Have values that guide decisions. Have enough self-awareness to recognize when something is wrong. This does not mean becoming emotionally detached. Quite the opposite. The more secure your foundation, the more freely you can connect with others. A person who knows they can survive alone may be better able to choose companionship because they genuinely want it rather than because they fear solitude. A person with financial resilience may be better able to make relationship decisions without financial desperation. A person with healthy self-esteem may be better able to experience sexual intimacy without treating it as a referendum on their worth. Independence can therefore support intimacy rather than oppose it. The two can coexist. You can say, I can take care of myself, and I choose to build a life with you. That is a powerful statement. It contains both autonomy and connection. And perhaps, that is what many people are ultimately seeking, not absolute independence and not complete dependence, but interdependence. The ability to rely on others without losing yourself. The ability to give without becoming depleted. The ability to receive without becoming powerless. The ability to love without ownership. The ability to share without surrendering every boundary. That balance requires maturity. Maturity does not mean becoming motionless. It means becoming capable of holding emotion without allowing every emotion to dictate your behavior. You can feel jealousy and still communicate respectfully. You can feel attraction and still make responsible choices. You can feel fear and still set a boundary. You can feel excitement and still consider consequences. You can feel disappointment and still avoid cruelty. You can feel desire and still respect another person's no. You can feel financial anxiety and still examine the numbers calmly. This is emotional freedom. Not the absence of emotion, the ability to respond rather than simply react, and that skill can be practiced. Before responding to an emotionally charged message, Wait. Before making a major purchase, wait. Before making a major relationship decision in the middle of an argument, wait. Give the nervous system time to settle. Ask what you will think tomorrow. Ask what consequences you are willing to accept. Ask whether the decision reflects your values or simply your current emotional state. Sometimes the best decision is still the same one, but after the pause, it becomes a decision rather than an impulse. That distinction matters, because ultimately, your life is shaped by choices, not all at once. One at a time. One conversation, one boundary, one investment. One saving decision, one honest admission, one healthy habit, one act of self-respect, one refusal to accept something that violates your values, one willingness to learn, one willingness to apologize. One willingness to begin again. That is how lives change. And if there is one message I would want you to carry forward, it is this: do not measure your freedom by how many things you can say yes to. Measure it by how confidently you can say yes or no according to your own values. That is true sexual freedom. It is also true financial freedom. If you can say yes to intimacy because you genuinely want it, and no because you do not, you are exercising agency. If you can spend because the purchase genuinely supports your priorities, and refrain because it does not, you are exercising agency. If you can remain in a relationship because you value it, rather than because you have nowhere else to go, you are exercising agency. If you can leave a job because your financial foundation gives you options, you are exercising agency. The purpose of knowledge is to expand that agency. The purpose of financial planning is to expand that agency. The purpose of emotional growth is to expand that agency. The purpose of healthy relationships is not to eliminate agency, but to allow autonomous people to cooperate voluntarily. And the purpose of understanding sexual motivation is not to create a rigid formula explaining every woman, every man, or every relationship. Human beings will always surprise us. Desire will always contain complexity. Context will always matter. Individual experiences will always differ. Instead, the deeper lesson is to remain curious. When someone behaves differently from you, ask why. When your own behavior surprises you, ask why. When a relationship changes, ask what has changed. When your financial habits trouble you, ask what emotional need might be underneath them. When you feel pressure, identify where it comes from. When you experience desire, recognize it without immediately turning it into an instruction. When you experience fear, listen to it without automatically obeying it. This approach replaces judgment with inquiry, and inquiry creates room for wisdom. You do not have to know everything about yourself before making healthy choices. You simply have to be willing to keep learning. There will be moments when you get it wrong. Forgive yourself. Then learn. There will be moments when someone disappoints you. Protect yourself. Then learn. There will be moments when your financial plan fails. Adjust. Then learn. There will be moments when a relationship ends. Grieve. Then learn. There will be moments when your desires change. Listen. Then learn. Life does not require us to remain unchanged. It requires us to remain awake. Awake to our choices. Awake to our health. Awake to our relationships. Awake to our money. Awake to the stories we tell ourselves. Awake to the difference between what we genuinely value and what we have merely been taught to value. That awareness can be uncomfortable, but it is also where freedom begins. Perhaps one day you will realize that you no longer need to perform success for anyone. You will know what enough means to you. You will know what kind of relationship supports your well-being. You will know what boundaries you need. You will understand that sexual desire is not something to fear or worship, but something to understand responsibly. You will understand that money is not a measure of your worth, but a resource that can support your goals. You will understand that attraction is wonderful, but respect is essential. You will understand that independence is valuable, but connection is valuable too. You will understand that pleasure matters, but so does consequence. You will understand that security matters, but so does adventure. and you will understand that a meaningful life is not created by maximizing any single one of these things. It is created by learning how to balance them. So build slowly. Build intentionally. Build with information rather than illusion. Build relationships where honesty is safer than pretending. Build finances that give you options rather than obligations you cannot escape. Build a relationship with your own body that is based on respect rather than shame. Build a sense of identity that can survive both praise and criticism. Build skills that make you more capable. Build savings that create breathing room. Build friendships that provide support. Build boundaries that protect your dignity. Build a future that does not depend entirely on someone else's approval. And when you make mistakes, do not assume the story is over. A mistake is an event. It is not your identity. A setback is a chapter. It is not the entire book. A difficult relationship is an experience. It is not a prophecy. A financial mistake is information. It does not have to become a permanent condition. You can change direction. You can begin again. You can learn. You can become more informed. You can become more deliberate. You can become more financially resilient. You can become more emotionally secure. You can become more honest about your needs. You can become more respectful of other people's needs. And that is perhaps the most hopeful conclusion we can reach. Human beings are capable of change. The patterns that once controlled us can become patterns we understand. The fears that once dictated our choices can become fears we manage. The financial habits that once created anxiety can be replaced by habits that create stability. The relationship patterns that once produced conflict can be examined and changed. The beliefs that once limited us can be questioned. The future is not guaranteed, but it is influenced by what we repeatedly choose. So do not wait for perfect certainty. You will never have it. Do not wait until you feel completely fearless. You may never feel that way. Do not wait until you have unlimited money. You do not need unlimited money to begin building freedom. Do not wait until you understand every aspect of sexuality or relationships. Begin with honesty, consent, health, communication, and respect. Do not wait until you become a completely different person. Begin with the person you are today. Take one step, then another. Save a little, learn a little, communicate a little more honestly. Set one healthier boundary. Ask one better question. Challenge one assumption. Replace one destructive habit. And let time do what time does best. Compound the consequences of repeated choices. A small decision made once may seem insignificant. A small decision repeated for years can transform a life. That is the quiet mathematics of human development, and it is also the mathematics of financial freedom. You do not become financially independent because of one perfect investment. You become more secure because you repeatedly make decisions that increase your options and reduce unnecessary vulnerability. You do not build a healthy relationship through one perfect conversation. You build it through repeated honesty, respect, repair, affection, and mutual choice. You do not develop sexual self-knowledge through one profound realization. You develop it by remaining curious about yourself and willing to learn throughout life. So, perhaps the final question is not simply, why do women have sex? Perhaps the larger question is, why do human beings make the choices they make, and how can understanding those choices help us live more consciously? The answer will never be one sentence. Human beings seek pleasure. We seek connection. We seek security. We seek novelty. We seek validation. We seek belonging. We seek freedom. We seek meaning. Sometimes we seek several of these things at the same time, and sometimes we choose wisely. Sometimes we do not. But every day gives us another opportunity to become more conscious of the forces shaping our choices. Use that opportunity. Know yourself. Protect your health. Respect consent. Communicate honestly. Build financial resilience. Spend according to your values. Save for the freedom you want. Invest in knowledge. Develop skills. Protect your time. Choose relationships that allow mutual dignity. And never confuse another person's approval with the final authority over your life. Your life is not a performance designed to satisfy everyone watching. It is a life you have to inhabit. So build one you can inhabit with peace. Build one in which your money serves your values. Build one in which your relationships allow honesty. Build one in which your sexuality can be approached with knowledge rather than shame. Build one in which pleasure and responsibility can coexist. Build one in which independence and intimacy strengthen rather than destroy each other. Build one in which your future self will look back and recognize the courage of your choices. And when you reach the end of another difficult day, remember this: you do not need to have solved your entire life. You only need to make the next choice a little more consciously, the next conversation a little more honestly. The next financial decision a little more intentionally, the next boundary a little more firmly, the next act of self-respect a little more confidently. Because freedom is rarely something that arrives all at once. It is something we build, choice by choice, habit by habit, conversation by conversation. Year by year. And eventually, if we remain patient and honest, we may discover that the greatest wealth was never simply the amount of money we accumulated, the number of people who desired us, or the approval we received. The greatest wealth was the ability to know ourselves, respect ourselves, connect authentically with others, and choose the direction of our lives. That is the freedom worth pursuing, and that is the life worth building.